Hey, Joe, just the threat of the Biden advisory is setting off Chinese officials. The official who's in charge of overseeing Hong Kong has accused the U.S. of attempting to embolden what he described as anti-China troublemakers or Hong Kong agents in the city and vowed that China would retaliate against any further sanctions on Chinese officials. This is coming as the U.S. will reportedly sanction another 7 Chinese officials over Hong Kong's year-old national security law, and also would issue an advisory, likely today, which would say to American companies that they could face electronic surveillance without warrants, scrutiny of corporate customer data, and possible retaliation due to a new Beijing anti-sanction law if they comply with U.S. sanctions. So all of this amounts to what President Biden had described as a deteriorating business climate in the city. The alert is also meant to remind companies, U.S. companies, that they need to understand that there are consequences for engagement with sanctioned Chinese officials. So all of this is coming just a couple of days before the U.S. is sending the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, to Asia. She's going to be visiting a variety of countries. There had been some rumbling that she might be meeting her Chinese counterpart in the port city of Tianjin, but now there have been several reports, Joe, that the Chinese have snubbed that idea.
Eunice, there have been threats that people that just work for media companies could go to jail based on what users put up there. Do you know whether is that just a threat? Do you know of any cases where that actually happened? Was that where it was actually enforced, or is it just more of a threat and kind of a scare tactic?
I think that there have been reports that people have had their writings taken down, and there have been several reports of that. But that's not so surprising given the changes that we're seeing in that city and what we see happens here on the mainland. And I think that's what the U.S. government is trying to kind of hammer home to a lot of the businesses in Hong Kong, that the environment is changing. And so they need to understand that the changes there are going to be much more, will not have as much daylight between mainland China as well as Hong Kong.
It's hard for me to ask you questions. I just wonder what the future looks like in terms of Hong Kong and in terms of Taiwan and in terms of, I just wonder how far this really goes.
It's a difficult question. It's difficult to really know because when you talk to the Chinese government, right, which is managing the entire place, they're going to say that, especially for foreign investors, there isn't going to be any change at all, and that the city is going to be economically prosperous. And there are a lot of business people in Hong Kong who also believe that, and it just depends on which sector you're in. So a lot of Wall Street firms have been hiring like crazy in Hong Kong. They see the potential for Hong Kong to be knitted more closely into the southern part of the country, which is going to be much more economically vibrant because they're experimenting with all sorts of stuff, in the financial realm. So there are people who do believe that. And even though, there are just as many or at least several very loud voices, especially who are activists of the risks of being in Hong Kong because, there is just so much grayness when it comes to the national security law.